At first glance, Hansa Market looked alive. Listings were active, vendors responded quickly. Orders were placed, paid, and shipped, just like on any other major dark web marketplace. Thousands of users logged in every day, convinced they were operating in complete anonymity. They trusted the encryption, they trusted the system. And most of all, they trusted Hansa. What they did not know was this: by the time many of them created their accounts, Hansa Market was already dead. The administrators were gone. The servers were no longer under criminal control. And every single login was being silently observed. While buyers negotiated prices and vendors uploaded product photos, law enforcement agencies were watching everything in real time. This was not a raid. This was not a shutdown. It was something far more dangerous. For weeks, Hansa Market continued to operate as usual. No warning banners, no seizure notices. No panic in the forums. Instead, the market became a trap. Passwords were collected, PGP mistakes were logged, shipping details were stored, and users kept coming, unaware that the platform they trusted had become a surveillance machine. Ironically, Hansa's reputation for security worked against its own users. When another major dark web market suddenly disappeared, people needed a safe alternative. And Hansa was waiting. This is the story of one of the most sophisticated sting operations in dark web history. An operation that didn't rely on brute force, but on patience, psychology, and trust. Because in the end, the most valuable currency on the dark web was never Bitcoin. It was belief, and Hansa Market turned that belief into evidence. Hansa Market did not appear out of nowhere. It emerged during a period of instability on the dark web, a time when trust was fragile, and established marketplaces were constantly under threat. After the fall of Silk Road, users had learned one painful lesson: no market was untouchable. Yet demand never disappeared. People still wanted a place to trade anonymously. Vendors still needed platforms to reach customers, and the dark web economy continued to grow quietly, steadily, and globally. Hansa Market entered this landscape as a secondary player. It was not the largest market, it was not the loudest, and it did not promise revolution. Instead, it offered something far more appealing: stability. Launched in 2015, Hansa positioned itself as a cautious, security-focused alternative to larger platforms. Its interface was clean, its rules were strict, and its administrators communicated carefully, avoiding unnecessary attention. Unlike some markets that chased rapid growths, Hansa grew slowly. Vendor applications were reviewed manually, scams were dealt with publicly. Security announcements were frequent and detailed. For many users, this created a sense of professionalism. Hansa did not feel chaotic, it felt managed. Over time, the market developed a reputation for reliability. Disputes were resolved, escrow systems functioned as expected, and most transactions ended without incident. This reputation became Hansa's greatest asset. In dark web communities, trust is not built through branding, it is built through survival. Markets that last are markets that users talk about, and Hansa lasted. As larger platforms struggled with technical issues, exit scams, or sudden shutdowns, Hansa remained online quiet, predictable, unremarkable, in the best possible way. By 2017, Hansa had established itself as one of the most trusted mid-sized marketplaces on the dark web. It offered drugs, digital goods, counterfeit documents and services, much like its competitors. But its appeal was not the products, it was the feeling of control. Users believed Hansa was cautious where others were reckless, that its administrators prioritized security over profit, that mistakes made by previous markets had been learned and corrected. Ironically, this conservative approach made Hansa the perfect refuge when chaos struck elsewhere. When AlphaBay, the largest dark web market at the time, suddenly went offline, panic spread through the ecosystem. Vendors lost storefronts overnight, buyers scrambled to recover funds. And they all asked the same question: where do we go now? Forums filled with recommendations, private messages were exchanged. And again, the same name appeared: Hansa. It was already there, already trusted, already waiting. What no one realized was that the very qualities that made Hansa attractive, its structure, its discipline, its reputation, would soon be turned against its users. Because behind the appearance of a stable, well-run marketplace, something had already changed. And the rise of Hansa Market was about to become its most dangerous illusion. To understand why the Hansa operation worked so well, you first have to understand how dark web markets actually function. For most users, the process appeared deceptively simple. You installed the Tor browser, you copied a link ending in .onion. And suddenly, you were inside a hidden marketplace, invisible to the outside world. Tor, short for the Onion router, was designed to anonymize traffic by routing it through multiple encrypted nodes. Each layer concealed the previous one, making it extremely difficult to trace a connection back to its source. For users, this created a sense of safety, but Tor alone was never enough. Darknet markets relied on a second layer of trust, encryption between users. This is where PGP came in. Pretty good privacy allowed buyers and vendors to encrypt messages using public and private keys. In theory, only the intended recipient could read the content, not even the marketplace itself. In practice, however, this system depended entirely on correct usage. A single mistake, an unencrypted address, a reused key, a copied username, could compromise anonymity completely. Most users believed they were more careful than they actually were. Then there was Bitcoin. Despite its reputation, Bitcoin was never truly anonymous, it was pseudonymous. Every transaction was permanently recorded on a public blockchain. If an address could be linked to a real person through an exchange, a reused wallet, or a shipping detail, the entire transaction history became visible. To manage this risk, dark web markets introduced escrow systems. Funds were held by the marketplace until the buyer confirmed delivery. This reduced scams and increased trust, but it also centralized power. The market became the middleman, and whoever controlled the market controlled the flow of information. This is where reputation systems came into play. Vendors were rated, buyers left feedback, trusted sellers rose to the top. Over time, these ratings became more valuable than anonymity itself. Vendors reused usernames across markets. They advertised on forums. They built recognizable brands, quietly sacrificing privacy for profit. From the outside, dark web markets appeared chaotic. In reality, they functioned like fragile ecosystems built on rules, habits, and assumptions are dangerous. Most users believed the market administrators were neutral, that they only facilitated transactions, that they could be trusted, because without trust, the entire system would collapse. This belief was rarely questioned. Security guides focused on avoiding law enforcement outside the platform, not inside it. Few users considered the possibility that the market itself could be compromised, quietly, without warning. That illusion of separation was critical. Buyers trusted vendors, vendors trusted escrow. And everyone trusted the platform. Hansa Market understood this structure perfectly. It enforced rules, encouraged PGP usage, promoted security tutorials. But in doing so, it also centralized data, usernames, passwords, messages. transaction metadata individually. These details seemed harmless. Together, they formed a map, and once law enforcement gained control of Hansa's infrastructure, they didn't need to break Tor, they didn't need to crack Bitcoin. They simply let the system keep running, and watched users compromise themselves. For years, dark web markets had played a familiar game with law enforcement. Markets appeared, authorities investigated, and eventually, platforms were shut down, often with public announcements and dramatic seizures. Hansa Market would be different. Behind the scenes, investigators were already shifting their strategy. Instead of chasing users one by one, they began focusing on infrastructure, servers, administrators, control. The operation against Hansa was led primarily by Dutch law enforcement, working in close cooperation with international partners, including the FBI and Europol. This was not a sudden breakthrough, it was the result of months of quiet intelligence work. Investigators monitored forums, tracked administrator behavior, and mapped technical fingerprints left behind by the people running the market. Contrary to popular belief, dark web administrators are not invisible. They make mistakes, they reuse accounts, they communicate. And eventually, patterns emerge. In Hansa's case, authorities were able to identify and locate the individuals behind the platform. In June 2017, Dutch police arrested two administrators in Germany. The arrests were precise, controlled, and deliberately kept secret. There was no public announcement, no seizure banner posted on the site. Instead, law enforcement made a critical decision. They would take over the market. After securing the servers, investigators gained full access to Hansa's back-end systems, user databases, private messages, transaction logs. At this point, they could have shut everything down. But they didn't, because shutting down Hansa would have ended the investigation, keeping it alive would expand it. Operating a dark web market came with legal and ethical challenges, but the opportunity was unprecedented. For the first time, law enforcement was not observing from the outside, they were inside the system. They could see how users logged in, how vendors communicated, how security features were actually used or ignored. Every interaction became intelligence. Critically, the market continued to function normally. No visible changes were made, the interface stayed the same. Support tickets were answered. From the user's perspective, nothing had happened. Behind the scenes, however, the rules had changed. Passwords were no longer protected in the same way. PGP usage was monitored, errors were flagged automatically. Investigators were careful not to disrupt operations too quickly. Their goal was not exposure, it was accumulation. The longer the market stayed online, the more data flowed in. And time was on their side. Then something unexpected happened. AlphaBay, the largest dark web marketplace in existence, was suddenly seized by US authorities. Its disappearance sent shockwaves through the ecosystem. And without realizing it, law enforcement had just created the perfect conditions. Because when AlphaBay fell, users needed somewhere to go. And Hansa Market was still there, online, trusted, and now fully controlled. What followed would turn a targeted investigation into one of the most effective dark web operations ever conducted. From the outside, nothing had changed. Hansa Market was still online. Listings refreshed, messages were sent, and transactions continued as usual. But behind the interface, the market was no longer what it appeared to be. After the arrest of the administrators, law enforcement quietly assumed full operational control. Servers were mirrored, databases were secured, and the entire platform was placed under surveillance. This was not a symbolic takeover, it was a functional one. Every technical decision, now served a single purpose: observation. Investigators did not rush, they did not interfere unnecessarily, and they did not alert users. Instead, they studied behavior. They watched how people logged in, how often they reused passwords, how rarely they updated security settings. One of the most critical changes involved encryption. Hansa Market had always encouraged users to rely on PGP for secure communication. Security guides were prominently displayed. Warnings about unencrypted messages were common, but encouragement is not enforcement. Many users still sent sensitive information in plain text. Shipping addresses, contact details, personal notes. Under normal circumstances, this data would have been encrypted or inaccessible to administrators. Under law enforcement control, it became evidence. In some cases, investigators adjusted the platform in subtle ways. Small changes that did not raise suspicion, but increased the likelihood of user error. Password reset mechanisms were observed closely. Login patterns were analyzed. Mistakes were logged and correlated. Users who believed they were anonymous revealed far more than they realized. At the same time, vendors continued to operate. High-volume sellers processed hundreds of orders per week. They reused usernames. They communicated across multiple markets. From an investigative perspective, this was invaluable. Instead of chasing individuals across forums and blockchains, law enforcement could watch entire networks operate in real time. They could see supply chains, vendor hierarchies, customer behavior, and they could do it without interference. Crucially, Hansa's reputation protected the operation. Because the market had a history of stability, users did not question its continued availability, even as other platforms disappeared. In dark web culture, longevity equals legitimacy, and Hansa had both. For weeks, the market functioned as a live intelligence collection system. Every new account added context, every transaction filled gaps. Every message increased clarity. The longer it ran, the more valuable it became. From a legal standpoint, this approach was controversial. Operating a criminal marketplace, even temporarily, raised complex questions. But investigators argued that the benefits outweighed the risks. Instead of arresting a handful of users, they could dismantle entire ecosystems. And then, the timing aligned perfectly. When AlphaBay was taken offline, panic set in. Vendors lost income overnight, buyers feared exit scams, and thousands of users searched for alternatives. Hansa Market saw an immediate surge in traffic. Accounts flooded in, experienced vendors migrated. First-time users followed recommendations from forums. None of them knew they were walking into a controlled environment. The silent takeover had worked. Hansa was no longer just a market, it was a funnel. And everyone who entered left a trace. If you're amazed so far, hit like and comment your thoughts. Once Hansa Market was fully under control, the operation entered its most critical phase. This was no longer about monitoring, it was about extraction. Law enforcement did not need dramatic interventions, they needed patience. Every day the market stayed online, more users compromised themselves. One of the most effective aspects of the operation involved human behavior, not technology. Users believed they were protected by layers of encryption. They assumed that as long as they used Tor and Bitcoin, they were safe. That assumption was fatal. When users logged in, their credentials were captured. Not in a way that raised alarms, but silently. As part of normal server operations, passwords were reused. Usernames appeared across forums, small habits created patterns. PGP, once again, became a weak point. Many users misunderstood how encryption worked. They trusted that uploading a public key was enough. But when messages were sent without encryption, the content was visible: addresses, names, special delivery instructions. Even when PGP was used, mistakes happened. Keys were copied incorrectly. Messages were decrypted client-side and resent. Old keys remained linked to new accounts. Each error was logged. Investigators did not need to break encryption. They simply waited for it to fail. Another vulnerability was account recovery. When users forgot passwords, they triggered recovery processes. Security questions, email habits, time-based behavior. Every interaction added context. Over time, individual data points became profiles. Buyers could be linked to shipping regions. Vendors could be linked to transaction volume, and repeated behavior created confidence. Confidence is what allowed law enforcement to move forward. This was not a blind sweep. It was a targeted accumulation of evidence. Then came the final phase. Once enough data had been collected, authorities shut the market down publicly, and without warning. This time, users were greeted with a seizure notice. The truth was revealed. Hansa Market had been under law enforcement control for weeks. The reaction was immediate. Forums erupted with panic. Users deleted accounts. Vendors disappeared, but it was too late. The data already existed: login histories, messages, transaction logs. In the weeks and months that followed, arrests began. Not all at once, not publicly, but steadily. Individuals were identified, cases were built, and doors were knocked on. Across multiple countries, some users were caught years later. They never knew which mistake had exposed them. Because the trap did not rely on one failure, it relied on many small ones. Hansa Market did not collapse because of a technical flaw. It collapsed because users trusted a system that had already been turned against them. The dark web had always promised anonymity. Hansa proved how fragile that promise really was. When AlphaBay went offline, the dark web entered a state of shock. At the time, AlphaBay was the largest marketplace in existence. It processed hundreds of thousands of listings. Millions of dollars flowed through it every week. Its sudden disappearance created a vacuum. Vendors lost storefronts overnight. Buyers feared that their funds were gone forever. And trust, already fragile, fractured even further. In this chaos, users searched for stability. They didn't want the newest platform, they wanted the safest one. And safety, on the dark web, is defined by reputation. Hansa Market benefited directly from AlphaBay's fall. It was still online, it had a history of reliability. And it appeared untouched by law enforcement. Forums filled with recommendations. Experienced vendors told newcomers where to go. Security guides were rewritten to include Hansa links. Private messages spread the word. What users did not know was that this migration was being observed in detail. Account creation surged, transaction volume spiked, and entire vendor networks relocated within days. From an investigative perspective, this was unprecedented. Law enforcement did not need to chase AlphaBay's former users. They came voluntarily. The irony was difficult to ignore. The shutdown of one market had strengthened another. But that market was already compromised. For users, this felt like survival. For investigators, it was consolidation. Instead of fragmented data across multiple platforms, activity was centralized in one place. The more trusted Hansa became, the more valuable it was to law enforcement. And the longer the market stayed online after AlphaBay's fall, the more complete the picture became. Some users suspected nothing. Others noticed small irregularities, slower support responses, minor glitches, but dismissed them as growing pains. After all, every market struggled during sudden growth. Very few considered the worst-case scenario, because thinking that a trusted platform could be controlled by authorities felt unthinkable. But that belief was exactly what made the operation succeed. The AlphaBay Effect did not just increase traffic, it amplified exposure. And when Hansa finally shut down, it didn't just end a market. It revealed how interconnected the dark web ecosystem really was, and how quickly trust could become a liability. When Hansa Market was finally shut down, the consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Authorities moved swiftly. Accounts were cross-referenced, transactions were analyzed, and arrests were coordinated across multiple countries. Some users were unaware their identities had been exposed. Others were caught in the act, stunned to realize their digital footprint had been traced back to them. The impact extended beyond individual arrests. Vendors lost their businesses, funds were seized. Digital goods vanished without a trace for many. The dark web felt suddenly smaller and far less safe. Forums went silent, the recommendations disappeared, and the ecosystem contracted under the weight of fear and uncertainty. Law enforcement remained largely quiet about operational details. Public announcements were limited, leaving users to speculate about the scope of the operation. And speculation ran rampant. Stories circulated online. Some exaggerated, some accurate, but all served a single purpose, reinforcing the perception that no one was untouchable. Hansa Market became a cautionary tale. The market had promised security, anonymity, and discretion. Yet those promises had been turned against users. The psychological impact was profound. Trust, once the most valuable currency on the dark web, was irrevocably compromised. Users questioned every platform, every vendor, every interaction. And while some sought alternatives, the risk was clear. The same mistakes could lead to exposure, arrest, or loss of funds. In the months that followed, investigators continued to analyze data collected during the operation. Additional arrests were made quietly. Intelligence from Hansa informed future strategies. The operation had not only dismantled a marketplace, it had reshaped the approach to cybercrime investigations. And for those who had relied on Hansa, the lesson was unavoidable. The dark web could never offer complete safety. In the end, silence settled over Hansa's former users, a quiet acknowledgement that the market they had trusted, and the ecosystem they had believed in, was now a memory and a warning. The fall of Hansa Market did not just affect the users who were caught or the vendors who lost their businesses. It sent shockwaves through the entire dark web ecosystem. For law enforcement, the operation was a blueprint. It demonstrated that patience, strategy, and understanding human behavior could be more effective than brute force. Rather than shutting down every market immediately, investigators could collect evidence quietly, observe patterns, and exploit small mistakes. For vendors and buyers, the implications were sobering. No matter how secure they believed their methods to be, the assumption of safety had been shattered. Reputation, encryption, and operational security, once considered reliable shields, could no longer guarantee protection. The Hansa operation also highlighted the power of centralized systems. Dark web markets rely on a few core functions: escrow messaging and reputation management. Whoever controls these functions controls the flow of information. In Hansa's case, that control was leveraged to gather intelligence on thousands of users simultaneously. The psychological effects were equally profound. Trust had always been the foundation of the dark web. Users depended on platforms, administrators, and peer networks. Hansa's betrayal, or, more accurately, the exposure of its users' misplaced trust, demonstrated that trust could be weaponized. And this was not lost on the community. After Hansa, users became more cautious. New markets struggled to attract attention, forums became quieter. Security guides grew more detailed, often citing the lessons learned from Hansa. Even technology evolved. Developers worked on better anonymization methods, more secure transaction protocols, and improved privacy tools. Yet, no matter how advanced the encryption, the human factor remained critical. Mistakes, repetition, and overconfidence could always create vulnerabilities. The operation also reshaped law enforcement tactics. Investigators saw the potential of combining legal authority with technical oversight. By subtly controlling infrastructure, they could monitor entire ecosystems without tipping off users. It became a model for future dark web investigations, a blend of patience, precision, and psychological insight. Ultimately, Hansa Market changed the way everyone approached the dark web. For users, it was a lesson in humility. For vendors, a warning that longevity does not equal security. For investigators, proof that understanding the system and the people within it can be more powerful than any raid or seizure. The market was gone, the money was seized. The arrests were made, but the lessons endured, because in the shadowy corners of the internet, one truth remained constant: trust is the real currency. And Hansa Market had just proven how easily it could be lost. In the end, Hansa Market was more than just a marketplace. It was a mirror, reflecting the vulnerabilities of those who navigated the dark web. It exposed how easily trust could be manipulated, and how the illusion of security could conceal profound risk. Users believed that encryption, anonymity, and technical knowledge were enough. But the human element remained: mistakes, habits, and assumptions. Even the most careful users were not immune. Hansa demonstrated that the most valuable asset on the dark web was not Bitcoin. It was belief in a system, belief in administrators, belief in a platform. And that belief was turned into evidence. For law enforcement, Hansa was a triumph of strategy and patience. It showed that understanding the ecosystem and the psychology of its participants could be more effective than forceful intervention. It became a case study in subtlety, precision, and intelligence-led operations. For the dark web community, the lessons were stark. No market is invincible, no reputation is unbreakable. And trust, once lost, is almost impossible to regain. Yet, in a paradoxical way, Hansa Market also drove innovation. New platforms emerged, security tools were refined, communities evolved to become more cautious, smarter, perhaps, but also more wary. The story of Hansa is a reminder that in any system built on trust, the human factor is both the greatest strength and the greatest vulnerability. It is easy to assume that technology alone can protect you. It is harder to recognize that your own actions, every choice, every habit, define your true risk. Hansa Market will be remembered not only for the sting, not only for the arrests, but for the lesson it left behind. In the hidden corners of the internet, anonymity is fragile, security is relative, and trust is the real currency. Those who forget this lesson are doomed to repeat it. And those who remember it may survive, but never without caution, awareness, and respect for the unseen forces at play. Because in the end, no system, however sophisticated, is stronger than the people who rely on it. What do you think about this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Support the channel by subscribing and sharing this story with your friends. It helps a lot.